If you live in Bitcoin, if you just spend more of your time in Bitcoin, if you move, you don't have to wait for your government to move. You don't have to wait for your company to move. You don't have to wait for somebody else to tell you to move. You can just move. And when you move, your life gets better. And it gets remarkably better because you're living in the honest system. And if you're saving in the honest system, then your savings increase relative to that productivity over time, and you would look richer and richer. And if you're saving in the dishonest system, it'll get worse and worse.
So today I'm honored to host Jeff Booth, so best-selling author of The Price of Tomorrow, and also the general partner at Ego Death Capital. And he's for sure the leading voice in technology, especially Bitcoin and the future of money. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to see you, Renaud. And most people won't know this, but we worked together at one of the tech companies, one of the companies that I built. So nice to see you again.
Yeah, no, for sure. You always had this technology in your blood, and it's great to see what you're doing. So I'm very excited to have a few questions for you today. Yeah, so first of all, just a very broad question about your current assessment, especially today, like Bitcoin just skyrocketing all-time highs, and everybody talks mostly about price action, but both of us agree that we might have some way more than price action on Bitcoin and what's coming up. But what is your current assessment about not only Bitcoin per se, but the impact that is happening in the macroeconomics or the whole global economy?
Yeah, and these are big questions, and everybody's trying to search for the answer of what's happening. The world feels wrong, right? Something's wrong. Everybody can feel it, but they can't put their finger on what's happening. So the broad view, what's happening is this. The natural state of the free market is deflation. What happens with humans, and what we do is in the free market is try to provide more value than what came before something. So if our value doesn't provide more value, entrepreneurs fail. The company fails. And if it does provide more value, users use it, and it destroys the value that came before it in other companies. So that process that you're talking about, that creative destructive process, is a deflationary process, with the output of the process being prices fall for everyone. And what does that mean simply? And it sounds really simple, and it is simple. But what does it mean for our existing systems? It means we should live in a system where every year prices fall, and we have to work less. And prices fall more, and we have to work less, and we have to and constantly as entrepreneurs create ideas out of their brains to create a better world, and the prices logically fall from that. And so that's the world we should live in. But what it imposes on our brains is a cognitive dissonance, because that's not the world we live in. We live in a world that extracts that productivity gain that should flow to us naturally, and concentrates it up into a different system, where the rich or the centralized powers get richer and richer and richer and more powerful, and extract more from us. Because if one system is deflationary, but the system we are in has to be inflationary to be able to survive, you can see the construct. These are opposites. It also means we've never lived in a global free market, ever. And no single person on this planet has a framework for what that looks like, because all of our history books would be referencing a control system rather than a free market. And then what that does to your brain is it says, the natural thing is, because if you're measuring everything from the other system you've always lived in, you say things like, well, we can't live in a free market. There has to be some manipulation, because you're trying to get your brain to square with what I just said, which is true. And the world you're living in isn't like that. These two thoughts can't be together in your brain. They're because they're opposites. As your brain starts to unwind what I'm saying, it forces a real conflict, because you have to let go of beliefs that you thought were true, And some of those beliefs were like, if you said no, we have to have inflation to live for society, what you're really saying is, I believe it's okay to print money out of nothing, to steal money from some people, so I can help so I can help, but that also concentrates. So you believe that I believe there must be theft in a market to be able to live productively, which is kind of insane. But again, a lot of people do that because they're at odds with what I just said. So the free market is deflationary. We know that is true. And then it's almost a rewiring of your brain as that sinks in and you let go of previously held beliefs that were wrong. And why this is so hard for each person on the planet to understand is you're going through that process. And what Bitcoin is, and I'm going to caveat to this with, if Bitcoin stays decentralized and secure, which I believe it will, I have a high confidence that it will, but if it stays decentralized and secure, it is the first thing that we've ever had without counterparty risk to the existing credit-based system that is an open, decentralized, and secure protocol bounded by energy. And so what's happening if you're measuring from Bitcoin, you're measuring the truth in economic terms. So it's an economic mirror, exactly as I predicted. You're living in the first global free market and all prices are falling to you. But if you're measuring, if you're someone else and you hate Bitcoin, Bitcoin doesn't care if you hate it. It is true, objectively true, that all prices are falling against it, and they will forever if it stays decentralized and secure. It's also objectively true if you hate it yourself and you're measuring in a piece of paper, all prices are rising for you. And it's also objectively true if you were, like in your previous job where you were a financial advisor and you weren't allowed to advise Bitcoin, that if you were measuring Bitcoin in the piece of paper that was being debased, that Bitcoin would appear to be going up, but it would be going up faster than all other assets. So all of your assets that you were selling people, all of the investment strategies that you were selling people, were also losing value to Bitcoin. So all three of those realities would be true to you as the observer, and Bitcoin wouldn't care about them. So Bitcoin is repricing, which creates more of a conflict in our mind. Experts that hated it and made their reputation on hating it now have to either admit they were wrong as it reprices them, or double down on hating it.
Got it. Yeah, you show a very like a huge conflict where on one side, that's especially in your book, of course, the central theme, if I'm not mistaken, where we have the deflation that is brought by technology, like especially Bitcoin right now, right, as a black hole that is.
Can I just pause you there? The deflation is not brought by Bitcoin. The deflation is brought by productivity gains in the free market. And Bitcoin is just an honest ledger. It's a neutral ledger. A currency it can be inflationary, but all Bitcoin is neutral. So it measures perfectly the productivity gains flowing to you. So I just want to highlight that it has nothing.
For sure. Yeah, it forces into that kind of setup, so to speak, right? So where you have to become more productive over time, bringing all prices down over time. And of course, it creates to wrap our heads around that. It's very difficult when you think, let's say when we say like deflation on this kind of system that we have today, it's basically the death of the system, right? You have to keep that inflating to actually keep up with everything, because there is a principal plus interest to be paid on every kind of financing that you have. My question to you would be, what do you see? How can we square off two such different systems for a transition that just doesn't implode everything? Do we just rely on let's say the dollar still is a unit of account until we get to some point where people transition to a thought in satoshis, or what do you see the actual event happening where that transition is actually going the way that you're describing for the masses, so to speak?
So it's so funny that people say this question all the time. For me, it's a humorous question. I'm not just discounting it, because as I described before, one system is Bitcoin is imposing this. And if you look back 16 years, every day it's imposing this, right? If you measure any time, it's imposing this discipline. And so when does this happen? It's not a light switch. People are saying, okay, when does one system collapse and the other system starts? Like that would ever happen. Like, think about any transition from an old even a company to a new idea, a new company. Think BlackBerry to Apple, or BlackBerry to the iPhone. It doesn't just have some people believe in the new system, and they have different outcomes, different experiences from what system they believe in, more value or less value. And that is happening for every human on the planet right now. And there are a tiny, tiny fraction of all humans that understand what I'm saying. That if you live in Bitcoin, if you just spend more of your time in Bitcoin, if you move, you don't have to wait for your government to move. You don't have to wait for your company to move. You don't have to wait for somebody else to tell you to move. You can just move. And when you move, your life gets better. And it gets remarkably better because you're living in the honest system. And if you're saving in the honest system, then your savings increase relative to that productivity over time, and you would look richer and richer. And if you're saving in the dishonest system, it'll get worse and worse. If you're saving in the dishonest system, even as a billionaire, there's only 21 million Bitcoin. There's 2,750 billionaires, and there's 63 million millionaires. They all can't have a Bitcoin. So even the billionaires and millionaires that are resisting this because they think they're winning out of a system that's extracting from others are getting repriced by Bitcoin, and it doesn't care. So when is an individual journey when you decide you've had enough of the other system and you want to spend your time in the honest system. And now the second order derivative of that and the third order derivative of that is, as you go down that journey and you understand that everyone who's gone down that journey has had to do the same thing as you. They've had to remove these bonds that they thought the construct of the world. These people, I can only get a job if these people say yes, and I'm working in this system, and I'm losing money, and I'm making it better and better with all my time, as it's getting worse. As you go down Bitcoin and you're working with, you can guarantee that everybody at the bottom of the rabbit hole on Bitcoin also understands they're living in an honest system. And so what would those people look like in building value? They probably would look very different than people that were trying to scrape together enough in the dishonest system, because they'd done the work. And that's what you see in a second order derivative and a third order derivative. When you meet people that have done that work, you realize that at one time they were over here stuck too. And by doing the work on Bitcoin and understanding that work, they're completely unstuck, not just from a monetary perspective, but from a values perspective. And they want to hang around other people that share the same values. And so when I said that you have a truly first global free market, I have incredible friends in Africa. I have incredible friends in all around the world that were at once like penalized crazily from this system, that are now in an honest system. So there's not a light switch. This is going to happen slowly and evolve, but nobody has to wait. You have an open network that nobody has to wait. So the question for each of us is, when do we spend more time? Not when do other people spend more time?
Fantastic. Yeah, feeling stuck in one system is actually exactly what recently Michael Saylor had described himself at the company when they decided to do the whole shift to becoming a Bitcoin treasury kind of company. And now, of course, just making the headlines and the whole craziness about the situation. What is your take actually on that? Is that just a person who, of course, has that same kind of view? Do you share his views of the role of Bitcoin as an asset that you just hold and never sell because you're going through that transition already, living in that on that kind of world that you're just describing, or is it just like a market play where still the dollar is the currency, but because it's automatically going to be devalued, it's something that would, because he gives the impression that it's still a system that where both worlds would still live. I'm not sure if you share that thought or
Yeah,
you have any.
I don't, and I've been pretty vocal in that I don't share that thought. But again, I can really like somebody and appreciate what they do, and disagree on a topic. So Michael Saylor is a friend of mine. I've spent a lot of time with him, and I think what he's doing in his MicroStrategy is brilliant. It's not my job to say whether he knows the same thing as I do or doesn't know, or how he has to appear in a public company to value U.S. as the U.S. as a reserve currency, because it might be too far a stretch for most people to understand that Bitcoin is repricing the U.S. dollar too, and over time, it is going to become a network that you're spending in Bitcoin. It might be too much of a stretch for most people to understand that, so maybe some people need that first. But I just, as a first principles, it's pretty simple to me. You have an inflationary monetary system, and the U.S. is part of that inflationary monetary system. And you have a neutral monetary system that allows the productivity gains to flow to society. Those things are at odds, regardless of if you peg Bitcoin to the U.S. and live in that system, or Bitcoin is neutral. If you individually peg Bitcoin to the U.S. system and measure it in U.S. dollars, what you will likely do next is you will trust third parties with your Bitcoin, and it'll centralize. And because you will not be spending in Bitcoin, you'll be pricing in the U.S. dollar derivative, which is an inflationary monetary system, and it has to be. And you will make the network, and eventually you'll get wiped out because you'll be centralizing your coins. They're not your coins; they're someone else's coins. And that will, and so if you did that for any length of time, at some point, the physics of the systems, because they're incompatible, break, and you will likely be on the wrong side of that break by trusting your coins to somebody else. And that is highly likely to play out. It's highly likely to play out that people will try to get you to leverage your coins for interest, for yield. And lots of people are going to take the bait, and lots of people are going to get wiped out, just like in FTX, just like in Celsius. It's going to happen time and time again as the system imposes a new set of rules on society. And so I think about spending Bitcoin in real terms. I spend every day in Bitcoin. I'm watching how fast that the growth is of the spending layer. I'm investing in that. In ego death, if think about this from a how do you make more money in the free market in this transition, right? Or how do you accelerate the transition that you're talking about and also get paid for creating value in society? Here's how I look at it. The risk-free rate of the world right now is 45%. And why would I say that? Is the last 16 years of Bitcoin is a 45% IRR against the existing system. And I expect that for the next 16 years as well, as it reprices the system. And it's going to be volatile. It'll go way up. Some of the years it'll be 300, 400% IRR. Some of the years it'll be negative. But the average, I believe, will continue. And why do I say risk-free? It is the only thing outside of the system that is decentralized, secure, bounded by energy. So it is the first principle, the only thing that if you hold in self-custody, you are completely risk-free from the existing system. And that is the risk-free rate of return. But a lot of people think the risk-free rate of return is a bond rate, right, of 5% or 4%. But we know the bond rate is losing 40% a year to Bitcoin. And we know it's not risk-free because because it has all of the tethered liabilities of debt that's already insolvent. So it's not risk-free at all. What about a house on top of that you can get 8% a year because the money supply is increasing at 8% a year? Is that risk-free? It's not risk-free because of the same thing. So every other thing other than Bitcoin has risk associated, and Bitcoin has a 45% IRR against that. So it is the only risk-free asset in the world, and that is the new hurdle rate to be able to make investments. So how would you beat that? You would do one of two things broadly. You would do what Michael Saylor is doing and leverage, try to take lower cost money and leverage it into better assets. That would be one way to beat that return. Or what we do is we invest in companies that are building essentially the new railways, the new internet, the new where the world's going, to make this more and more valuable on top of the layers. And those companies would be denominating their balance sheet in Bitcoin as they turn profitable. And so in Ego Death, I can't believe what we get to see. I cannot believe if I could just, it's impossible to explain how fast some of these companies are growing and how fast their balance sheets are growing in Bitcoin. That is, in the appearance to the US dollar, is growing at 45% per year. So it looks like, and I've said this on a couple of different podcasts, it looks like if you were in Argentina and you were able to invest in another protocol or a company on top of a protocol like Google in 1999, 2000, and you took Argentina, the return of Google and US cash flows, the growth of Google, plus your dollars weren't being as devalued as fast as Argentina peso. So you would have a massive, you'd have a exponential return on top of a exponential return. And so, and so what we think we're doing in our fund is we're living in Bitcoin and we're expanding the network and the protocol on top of Bitcoin, and everyone else is living in Argentina. They just don't know it because they're pricing from this insane system. And I cannot believe that there's this opening to essentially, in the free market, help others and do so well and get paid so much for it. It's remarkable. So when I watch other people kind of fluttering around trying to make their 2% and everything else, and all the investment advisors trying to make this, competing with each other on all of their investments that are losing value to this, and then you add in, you get to build some of the most exciting companies that are going to come in the next 20 years. I seriously wonder why people don't see it.
Yeah, yeah, of course, just to get your head around that possibility just creates like a geo arbitrage, then the currency FX that just disappears, and the whole concept. Yeah, it's like a quadruple leverage.
First global free market, and all it takes is understanding it at a deeper level and moving your time.
Got it. Fantastic. Yeah, no, that's a great it's actually a great segue to one of my main questions here. What do you see like a daily, like let's say we get to this transition, people actually get it, right? So a normal person just I need to jump on this and think differently, and now I want to act on Bitcoin. Do you feel like the deflationary aspect of the idea that your money or your token or your economy will be more and more efficient, does it actually prevent you to spend today? Do you see that kind of things happening? Because that's the kind of the argument that we hear sometimes, like, if it's deflationary, why should I use that as a currency right now? Why don't I just keep saving and wait a little more? How would you respond to that kind of argument?
So let's interrogate it from both sides. Is it true that you don't spend because the value of your money is increasing, or productivity is increasing? Is that true? It's the most insane concept when people say that that's true, because it's not true. You buy an iPhone every couple of years, and why? Because it delivers you more value. I'm sure you've bought TVs, and even though you know the TV a couple of years is going to be way more valuable and less price, have you ever bought a TV? Have you ever bought a computer? Have you ever? Do you buy food? Do you buy, like, we buy because we want something when we want something. But let's now take, instead of just interrogating it from one side, let's interrogate it from a first principles on the other side. Because the other argument is we wouldn't buy unless money is stolen from us. Is that insane? Does anybody ever wake up one day and say, oh, okay, that I'm going to build a world where the only reason people buy is because if they don't, I'm going to steal more money faster? How would you like to live in that world? And by the way, you do live in that world. You do. And most people on the planet do, because they don't understand Bitcoin today. And then they get trapped in these nonsense circular equations, and they believe somebody else with economic policy that should be able to, some person running math models that calls themselves economists based on manipulated money, making up new rules to tell them what they do. It's insane. But I say that, and I say, but it's the world we've always known, so people don't question it. And that's why Bitcoin's so hard to understand, because you hear these narratives, and you hear them, and oh yeah, that expert said that, so that's true, and you never interrogate it to a deeper level, because you trust the expert, that they know what they're talking about. And I can tell you flat out, they have no idea what they're talking about.
For sure, for sure. Do you see, let's say, did you get excited about the fact, maybe, I don't know, on the political transition that is happening in the United States, or being more Bitcoin friendly? Is that something that you're like just very neutral, as Bitcoin is, based on your argument? Or do you think, for example, I don't know, capital gains tax in some countries are different than others? Is that like a catalyst for more adoption, in your opinion, or are you completely neutral to that at all? What is your take on that?
So I think they bringing this into more awareness and having these conversations, including your podcast, touches people, and they find it in their own time. So I don't think Trump really understands Bitcoin at the level that I do yet, but I didn't 10 years ago. I didn't. Right. And I was RFK Jr.'s first Bitcoin transaction 2.5 years ago. At that time, he didn't understand Bitcoin. And so how does the world change? It changes individually by people changes, and that's slow for each of us. But it's inevitable, because we create the world that we see around us. We always have. It's also chaotic, as new ideas compete with old ideas, and our minds change. But that's the way the world's always changed. We live on top of that. And so that, and I wrote in the book, I wrote a chapter about game theory on how that happens. But this is inevitable, and it's inevitable every country sees this. But you don't have to wait for your country. It's inevitable that every person sees this. It's inevitable that every company sees this. Why? Because it's so much better for them. Yeah. But they have the choice. And so what would that look like as a country that said, we're not going to adopt the free market? We're going to, what is it saying? It's saying we're going to close off our citizens from this productivity gain, and we're going to control money. And where would that lead? Wouldn't it lead to somewhere like North Korea closing off the internet for their citizens? But it doesn't change the internet. It just changes the people inside that country. So what do you think the people inside any of these countries would do in a global free market? Where wouldn't they try to escape that country? And wouldn't they collect Bitcoin anyways and use that to escape the country and go somewhere else? And wouldn't those people that knew Bitcoin and understood this and had some Bitcoin, like in North Korea, you could mine Bitcoin and you wouldn't have to tell that still a ton of hash rate of Bitcoin because they can't stop it. A government can't stop it. So as those people had more capital and more resources and more understanding, don't governments all over the world always compete for the talent and capital? So wouldn't all of those people have a place to go? And that's what's happening. So that game theory is a global competitive game theory that isn't negotiating with governments. They're trying to negotiate with it. And what Trump has just realized is if I go first and I try to drive more of this, it sends a signal to the free market to the US. I can consolidate more. My citizens will be better off. And then if there's a high capital gains on it, and then another country comes in and says, wait, we're going to do it for a lower capital gains or no capital gains, where do you think the capital will go? The capital and talent will go where it's best favored. And that's, by the way, the rise of the US in the first place was exactly because of that. The Constitution protected individual rights and freedoms. A lot of people moved from Europe to take advantage of the free market because it protected their individual rights, and they couldn't compete in one place. They moved to another place to compete. All of those ideas produced a productive society, and the US became a global superpower as it was more productive. And then it got consolidated through broken money in the Federal Reserve, and it got worse and worse and worse. But we're now living in a truly global free market, or at least the people who understand Bitcoin and are already living in a truly global free market. And they're watching other people still live in control systems, and they're puzzled.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Would you say that Bitcoin would act as a physical, almost like a gravitational force into that productive free market, as a digital constitution that would naturally bring people around that center, whoever gets what Bitcoin goes and just goes with the flow to playing with that game theory, so to speak, and created
I can only tell you my own personal view, and then everyone else's personal view is the same thing. As you go deeper on the rabbit hole, you start to lose what you thought the world looked like in the chase for money on the other world, and you start to be see what it actually could look like, which is a dramatic change. But what that means is the more time you put in and the deeper you go, the better your life is. And I can only tell, and you know me from kind of Build Direct days, and you know kind of what. So I've never had a problem with capital or money or anything else, and friends, and so I've always had something, ups and downs, lots of mistakes, everything else. But I've always had something that was pretty remarkable. But I can't tell you how much better, how much easier things are in this world than they were in the other. It's just it's almost like a mirror reflecting back. And the more you do in this, the more abundant it is, the more it reflects back positivity, and it comes back to you everywhere. And the people I've met and what that looks like, it's so remarkable. Personally, it's hard to even just describe. I know a whole bunch of other people because they come up to me all the time, and some people, because of my work, that it's also changed them, and their lives are totally remarkable. They just completely changed. So it's a very individual thing that as you spend more time, you go through this process. But that's why it's so hard to talk to when somebody isn't there or they're resisting this. Then some of the people in Bitcoin are fighting. They're pushing back, right? And why don't you get this? Because they've seen something that's totally different, and then that causes this push. And I just realize everybody's going to see it in their own time. This is imposing new rules, and those rules are very different. You have a system based on coercion, manipulation, control, where you're inside that system getting stolen from. And every action you take inside that system makes that system stronger. And inside that system, you believe there's a construct of those other people are taking it from you. But you are making the system stronger through all your actions. And it's harder and harder and harder, and you can't put your finger on what the problem is. And then you have a system of truth. It's just a global ledger that can't be manipulated. So now you have a system of truth, hope, and abundance, and it doesn't require any coercion. It doesn't require anything. All it requires is an open mind to understand it, the curiosity to understand it. So if you're living in one of those two systems, what do you think would have better effects for you and your family? The one that's stealing from you based on coercion and control, or the one that's not stealing from you based on truth and abundance? And it seems pretty obvious after you've done the work, which one you would choose. And then you ask others, why are they choosing the other? But they can choose whatever they want. It's free market.
Fantastic. And let's say that adoption just skyrockets from now on, and it goes the way that things are going, of course, accelerating more and more into should we say a hyper Bitcoinized kind of world. What would you see as a not perfect, but in your mind that you would like to see the world in 10 days if the adoption goes the way that is really positive for Bitcoin? Like, I don't know, maybe a Satoshi being like the representation of a dollar nowadays, or anything like that. How would you see production being financed?
Even the question presupposes the US dollar.
Right? Yeah, of course, we need to take it away. Exactly.
And that's why it's so hard. That's why this transition is so hard. I don't see it like that. I don't see hyper Bitcoinization, and it's $43 million in the US dollar, and we use a US dollar. I see we have a network of a global free market, and people are using this as a global free market. And what would that mean? It would mean forever prices fall. So the value you describe to something relative to the currency being debased is the construct that is going to change, because you won't convert Bitcoin to a piece of paper to then measure prices. You'll measure prices in Bitcoin. And what that means is let's just go through kind of rough numbers. There's 7 billion people on this planet without assets, right? 7 billion. And those 7 billion people without assets means their money the asset, at least a house, holds its value relative to the currency debasement. So those people are somewhat protected by the currency debasement, but they can't spend their house on food. So the food prices are rising, and their energy prices are rising, and they're stuck, even the people with houses. But let's say the 7 billion without houses. Those people are getting destroyed. They're getting ripped off like crazy, because you have theft globally that is exponential. And those people are essentially modern day slaves. That's what the world looks like. And they're hurting. And they're getting on boats to save their families, to move to countries that are stealing more money. So they're at least relatively better. And they all think they're winning inside this system. And then the people on top, the very top of this system, they're only winning from the extraction of those 7 billion people. And they think they're winning. And they wonder why the world looks like it does when they are contributing to the way the world looks like it does. In the other system, you have 8 billion people in service of 8 billion people. How many of those 7 billion people are we going to find Einsteins and Faradays and people that make our lives better, that are today modern day slaves, that can't use their brains to be able to create more value for us? So we suffer too, but we can't see we suffer because we're comparing that inside a system of extraction. If you move into a system of cooperation, that global free market serves us all better. We can't even, that's why I say it's so hard to even imagine, because your question supposed a relative value of US dollars because the framework is from that system. And you can't measure the unknown, but you can predict what would happen using first principles on a global free market. And using first principles is all of those entrepreneurs competing for more value is in service of you, even if you're not working. Everything falls in price forever. So the value eventually, when the value, not the value in US dollars, the value of Bitcoin is almost infinite compared to all of the other things that fall to free. In time, a very little Bitcoin, very tiny little Bitcoin will be so valuable to you, and no one collecting a lot of it today, if they could hold on to it, would ever be able to spend it all.
Got it. Automatically raising billions of people at the same time to a plain level field where everybody, doesn't matter where you are, you can just trade it without even the need of actually migrating to a new country, because it would be the whole world like that.
The entire world is moving through this transition, and if what I'm saying right now is your brain wants to push back on it, and you're still spending most of your time, I'm talking to other people listening to this podcast, spending most of your time fighting this or inside the other system, then it should be telling you something, not everyone else something. It should be telling you how early we are on this transition. And just like anything, if you're early, there's so much opportunity to help others understand the journey. There's opportunity everywhere in this new system, because as soon as you move your time in it, you realize how many people are so confused about this path. And what does the free market reward? It rewards helping others. It rewards doing something better than somebody else for other people. That's what it rewards. So this is, so if there was this new global free market on this protocol that couldn't be destroyed, that was imposing this, but 8 billion people on the planet didn't know, there might be a couple 100,000 that actually know what I'm talking about at this level. Wouldn't that signal opportunity everywhere?
Fantastic. Really appreciate the insights. I think the quality of the content that has been shared today will make a lot of people think all over the place, and maybe rethink, especially when you live in the US and that problem is maybe not as acute like people who live in Brazil, for example, where I'm from, right, where you see that actually happening and bringing so many people to move to try to beat the system, but still within the system. So I hope that can create a little bit of a click in your head so you can think about it. Jeff, I know your time is valuable. Thank you so much for everything that you shared today, and I hope we can do something like that soon in a very different adoption rate in the future. Appreciate that.
Really great. We're not.
Thank you.